Peter Baker, talk about the kind of palpable sense of helplessness on the political left. On the subject, we've talked about retribution. Let's talk about recourse. What do the Vindmans do? What do the four feds on the inside of DOJ, who did as much as they could, as our guest reported last night? They can't hold a press conference. What they could do was kind of shout from inside the institution in the form of withdrawing from this case. When structures of the government are under attack from inside the government, who to see about that? Who's going to report stuff in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're right. They're not holding press conferences. The four prosecutors who withdrew from the case, in one case actually resigned altogether, they made their statements in legal filings. It was literally a one-sentence filing to the court saying that this attorney is withdrawing from the case, and it felt like a thunderbolt because it was so extraordinary what the implication of that sentence was. And I think you're seeing a career workforce in the federal government, whether it be in the Justice Department or the State Department or the military, very much on edge, very much uncertain of where this is heading. They have been told by the President of the United States that they are part of a cabal, they're part of a deep state enemy. You know, there are lots of presidents who are frustrated by the professional bureaucrats around them when they come into office, but they've never seen a president wage war on them quite as openly and overtly as this one is. He, of course, would say it's the other way around, that they're the ones who have been plotting against him. But it's caused this extraordinary moment in Washington where you have a president and the government he leads at odds in a most, palpable and fraught way. And if this president's going to win re-election and have 5 years still to go, you can only imagine what that 5 years is going to be like.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.